Hi everyone, we're going to keep reading A Night Divided. We're on chapter 40. As we walked home, Mama made us wipe our tears and told us to smile and properly greet everyone we passed. People get caught when they look like people who should be caught. She said, "Smile." "What about Papa?" I mumbled. "You will see him tomorrow. Save a hug and a kiss for him until then, because he will want it." Mama spoke with confidence, but I didn't know whether that was because she believed it or because she wanted me to believe it. There was a time in my childhood when I accepted as fact everything my parents said, simply because it never occurred to me that they could have been wrong. But Papa had said he would return from his visit to the West, and he was wrong. Mama had said the wall wouldn't last and we'd all be together again. That was wrong too. So wrong that to make things right again, we now had to put everything at stake, including our lives. I wished I could return to that time of my childhood just long enough to believe my father would be okay, simply because my mother had pronounced it so. But I had seen too much reality to ever go back. As it was, the best I could do was pretend to believe her, so she would worry less about me. Mama assumed she had cheered me up and went on to say, "Until we're all together tomorrow, we are going to pack our clothes and wash ourselves and clean the apartment." "Clean?" I asked. "Why, if we're only going to leave it?" "When we're gone, Stasi will be everywhere in our home." It was Mama's German pride speaking now. "I won't have them saying the Lowe family are pigs. We are going to clean it." Fritz and I didn't argue. There was no point in it. We returned home with only a passing comment from Frau Eberhardt that we were back earlier than usual. Mama walked past as if she hadn't heard her, but I curtsied politely and we hurried back to our apartment. None of us needed reminding this time about the microphones. Mama only announced that the gardening could wait for a day. Today we would clean and get Fritz packed to leave for the military tomorrow. It was a perfect cover story for our real purposes. I was given the job of cleaning the front room, which I still thought was ridiculous, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because any complaint would be overheard, flagged, and reported. So I pretended to be cheery, but compensated by giving my mother irritated looks whenever she passed by. Mama prepared an early supper for us, more of Herr Krause's food, and Fritz and I ate as if it was our last meal. Fritz said my constant hunger was all in my mind, but I noticed he acted the same way, always eating whatever was available in case no food came to us tomorrow. "I'm supposed to be at work tomorrow for my new job," Mama announced, "but I need to go back to Oma Gertrude this evening and make sure she's okay. I might not make it home by curfew, in which case I'll return first thing in the morning." Fritz and I looked back at her and nodded our understanding. The visit wasn't to be sure Oma Gertrude was okay. Mama was going to say goodbye. It would be her last chance to see her mother, ever. As guilty as I felt for starting to tunnel without Mama's knowledge, I couldn't imagine how she must feel for leaving without being able to bring Oma Gertrude with us. The fact that they were being pulled apart was my fault, and I hoped Mama could one day forgive me for that. Partially to compensate for my guilt, I offered to clean up the kitchen so my mother could get on the road as soon as possible. Besides, I felt more worried than ever because we were so close now, and because I couldn't be at the tunnel tonight. Even if my father survived a collapse of his tunnel, Grenzer officers with their long rifles in hand would be there to greet him at the surface. Mama left as soon as she finished eating. Afterward, Fritz helped me finish in the kitchen and then said he had his own errand to run. It shouldn't have been any of my business where he was going, but I needed to know. It had to be something good to justify leaving me alone on such a dangerous night. Claudia, he said. She's often at the clubs in the evening. I just want to say hello. Or goodbye. That would probably be a hard conversation, especially since she would never know how final his farewell was. I nodded, and he darted out the door. After he left, it was a very long evening for me. There was nothing more to pack or to clean, and nothing I could concentrate on for more than a few seconds. I thought it might be nice if I had someone to say goodbye to. Anna. But I'd sooner talk to Frau Eberhardt than my former friend. Curfew began when it was dark out, and it was only a few minutes after that when Curfew began when it was dark out, and it was only a few minutes after that when Fritz came trudging into the apartment with his head held low. He looked up at me with heavy eyes and started toward his room. How did it go? I was hopeful, though from his appearance I already had my answer. He only muttered, I really did love her, Goethe. More than she ever loved me back, apparently. Only then did I understand his full purpose in going. It wasn't to say goodbye to Claudia. It was to ask her to come with us. I wasn't sure how much Fritz had said or what promise I wasn't sure how much Fritz had said or what promises he possibly could have offered her about their life together. They were both so young. But I knew he still loved her. So that was it then. He had gone to beg Claudia to come with us, where they would be free together. So that was it then. He had gone to beg Claudia to come with us, where they would be free to be together. And she had refused him. Chapter 41. Those joining the military were supposed to report for service first thing on the morning of their appointed day. However, since some boys throughout East Germany had to travel into Berlin, they would be accepted at the intake station throughout the day. Fritz hoped the extra hours would buy him for one final walk to the tunnel. He seemed in better spirits today, or at least he was covering well enough. During the night, I had listened at his door for any sign that he was upset, but if he was, I didn't hear it. That was how we became in the East, never too happy and certainly never too sad. Compared to most others, I wasn't as good at reining in my feelings. Lately, I was a split of two strong emotions, each fighting the other to control my mood. Today might be the day of our escape, or the day of our arrest. I wasn't exactly sure how to feel. Intensely excited or intensely afraid. Mama came home shortly after Fritz and I finished breakfast and announced to the microphones that she was ill. Despite the weak tone of her voice, just one look at her assured me she was fine. She turned up the radio and then whispered in my ear that she would have to stay inside, at least for the morning. Of course, this was only her excuse to delay going into work. However, it did create one problem. If she was sick, she could not risk being seen on the streets. Did you talk to Oma Gertrude? I hated to ask, but I wanted to know. Mama whispered. She only wondered why we waited so long. I will see her again, Goethe, somehow. Mama instructed Fritz and me to go to the tunnel and be sure things were okay, and then to do whatever was necessary to connect them. When that was finished, we were to come home and get her. We would have supper tonight in the West. It was everything I could do not to run to the welcome building. Fritz reminded me more than once to walk slower and to wipe such an eager expression from my face. You're like a beacon right now, he said. All someone has to do is look at you to know you're up to something. How do you do it? I asked. How can you look so casual on a day like this? Because I know what's at stake if I don't. Now relax. Be calm. I was as calm as a blizzard, but tried hard not to show it. That became extra important as we approached the wall. Even from a distance, we heard noise on the other side, barking dogs and the angry voices of Grenzers. The last thing we needed was to get their attention. Why are they here? I hissed. Had the tunnel already collapsed? Were they just waiting for us to show up, walking like fools into the lion's den? Fritz hushed me, and then we pressed against the wall to listen. To be heard above their dogs, the officers were shouting at one another, and every so often we caught their words. Water pipes, leak, West German incompetence, investigate. They said nothing about a suspected tunnel or about anyone's arrest or death. From the little we could gather, they knew water pipes ran through this corridor and blamed the sinking soil on a leak somewhere underground. Perhaps any digging noises they'd heard was also credited to the leaking pipe, but we also caught the word investigate. They were going to dig down, and when they did, they would discover far more than a broken pipe. Fritz grabbed my arm to reassure me. We're leaving this afternoon, Goethe. They probably won't go looking before then. Maybe not, but it wasn't impossible either. At least the tunnel hadn't collapsed. That was my first thought once we entered. It may have unnerved me the first time I went underground, but now this small dirt corridor was the only place I felt truly secure. The world outside was the dangerous place. That's where the Stasi and Grenzer officers hunted night and day, where gossips and tattlers could destroy lives, and where conversations in the privacy of a home were anything but private. But in this tunnel, nothing bad would happen. Not unless the world figured out we were here. As we got deeper into the tunnel, better news awaited us. Dominic was already over on his side, quietly digging. A small hole had opened up in the clay soil between us. Nothing that any creature larger than a rabbit could squeeze through, but it was a start. If I went all the way down on my stomach, I could see his feet. Where's Papa? I asked Dom in a voice no louder than was necessary. Still securing the braces. We worked all night. There are Grenzers overhead, Fritz said. They found the sunken area and want to investigate. We know, Dom answered. We can hear their dogs. So let's dig, I said, getting to my knees. Let's dig and be out of here before they find us. We can't go much farther, Dom said. Papa thinks this last connection is holding the tunnel up, like the bearing wall of a home. Then we can't open it? It was impossible that we should have come so far to be stopped now. Let's just try and see what happens. Dom was always more of a tease, and he was back in that role now. Sheesh, Fritz, has she really gotten that pushy in the last 4 years? How have you managed? I sat back and folded my arms. Pushiness was a necessary side effect of being the youngest, and I felt like throwing a full-scale tantrum right then and there to remind them of it. Fritz only chuckled and brushed his hand across the top of my head. She's worse than you can imagine, Dom. But if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here. He was quiet and said, I missed you. There was silence on the other end. Then Dom's voice came in little more than a whisper. And I missed both of you. Mama, too. Papa's cooking is terrible. I knelt forward again. So what can we do? Papa said we have to be patient for another couple of days until the dirt settles. No, the settling is the problem, I protested. Fritz is supposed to join the military today. If he doesn't... We can't open this until we know it will hold. Fritz sounded certain, but just from looking at him, I knew he was every bit as worried as me. He didn't have 2 days left. Not even one. Dom continued, Papa wants you to brace your side of the tunnel. Do anything you can to secure the dirt overhead. Once we're sure both sides are strong, Then we'll finish chipping away at the middle. I'll make mortar for the bricks. Fritz said, Goethe, to make it, I need water from the pond. I was already on my way with the bucket in hand. Chapter 42. This time, when I ducked through the boarded-up windows, I needed to be more careful than ever before. If the ground was being studied on the other side of this wall, I couldn't do anything that would make the watchtower guards take notice of me here. If they hadn't done so already, it wouldn't be hard for them to connect my actions with their sinking ground. So I stuck to my routine when I entered their sights. I loaded the bucket with dirt and then stuffed the sheet over it. My buckets were heavier than they used to be, and I was carrying them better. It was a small thing, but I was proud of it. I glanced back once at the watchtower, as I always did, more often than I should. I couldn't see anyone there this time, so maybe they were inside, or maybe they were part of the ground investigation. If so, I hoped that was a good thing. When I turned forward again, I jumped with surprise and almost cried out. Anna was standing there, nearly in front of me. I wasn't sure where she had come from. The only way she could have arrived so quickly was if she had already been here hiding and watching. Anna had surely seen me come from inside the building just now. She looked as nervous as I felt, with a rigid posture and licking her lips as if we lived in the driest of deserts, but I couldn't understand why. I had everything to lose in this moment, while she only risked losing her clean dress if I decided to push her into the pond, which I was seriously considering. Can we talk? She asked. You can talk to me, but I'm not sure who I'm talking back to. My words were bitter and angry. Am I talking to the Stasi right now? Or the Grenzers? The only thing for sure is that I'm not talking to a friend. Maybe I never was. If you won't talk, then will you listen? Anna asked, because I have things to say, and if I don't tell them to you, I will have to tell somebody. Which would you prefer? Reluctantly, I nodded for her to follow me and then continued on to the pond. After all, I still had work to do. Anna sat on a rock near the pond and clasped her hands together. The Stasi visited us after Peter died, she said. They searched our house and found things from the West. Innocent things that everyone has. Some black market perfume for my mother, a television with its station turned to the West, and some forbidden books. Nothing we'd purchased, just ones my family still had from the old days. I don't even think my parents remembered we had them, to be honest. The Stasi used those things to blame us for Peter's escape attempt and said my parents would be arrested for encouraging subversive behavior and I would be taken away. I dumped the bucket into the pond. It didn't matter that she saw the dirt wash into it along with the sheet. As I did, I said, You told me that in his note, Peter took responsibility for his own actions. Didn't they care about that? I already knew the answer and felt naive for even asking. Of course they didn't care. The Stasi always hunted for the biggest game they could catch. The rest of us were simply their bait. We begged them for mercy, Anna said. We promised if they let us go, we'd do anything they wanted. How could you make a promise like that? What choice did we have? Goethe, tell me honestly, wouldn't you have done the same thing to save your family? Maybe. Probably. Of course I would have, but there was another part to her story. The part I wasn't sure I could stomach. The Stasi offered us a trade, she said. For the right kind of information, they would erase any files on our family and give us a fresh start. We agreed. We had no choice but to agree. So we started looking and listening and trying to find something suspicious. We told ourselves we were doing the right thing because whoever was breaking the law deserved to be caught. Then Anna's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know it would be you, Goethe. Why did it have to be you? I try to bluff. Whatever you think. I know about the tunnel. I've been there. You saw the dried mud still on my boots when you were in my room. Something had become lodged in my throat by then, and speaking took effort. Your parents? They only know about the gardening. They think you're terrible at it. But you've told the Stasi? Not yet. My parents haven't learned anything useful on their own, so we keep delaying, but the Stasi are getting impatient. They want names. They want arrests. I've already lost my brother. If I don't say something soon, I'll lose my parents too. So you'll sacrifice my family, even to save yours? My tone was icy, even though it shouldn't have been. I was no saint and couldn't pretend my choices would be any nobler if I were in her situation. And she was right. Her family was innocent of any crimes against the state. Mine was not. But Anna shook her head. Goethe, to save my parents, I'm going to tell the Stasi tomorrow. I need you to be gone tonight. My heart pounded with the impossibility of that. The tunnel isn't finished yet. But Anna replied, I gave you as much time as I could. Don't you see that all this time I've been trying to protect you? I could have run to them a month ago with my suspicions, but I didn't. I wanted you to give up this crazy plan or turn yourself in and beg for mercy. What do you suppose the Stasi will say when they realize how long I waited to tell them? I'm already going to be in trouble. I didn't want Anna in any trouble, and the thought of her facing consequences for my crime made me cringe. I never thought about that. I said, Anna, if you're in danger, just go. But do it today. Be free, Goethe, the way you want to be free. Come with us. I said, be free with us. My family would never leave, she said. They wouldn't dare. Not after the way Peter died. Tell them it's what Peter would have wanted. I took her hand and gave it a squeeze. In his honor, you should live the life he wanted to have. But Anna pulled her hand free. Even behind a wall, this is our home. And the wall can't last forever. It will come down one day, and then I want you to be the first to greet me. I'll be there, I promised her, and every day until then I will miss you. Hot tears filled my eyes. You are my friend, Anna. I always was, she said, and always will be. I wanted to hug her goodbye, but she refused it. At first I thought that was because of how dirty I was, but then she cast an eye toward the watchtowers and said, We don't say goodbye when they're watching. We only say, see you soon. So I waved at her as she walked away. But instead of a farewell, I said, Ask yourself why Peter left, Anna. Please, promise me you will find that answer. She didn't respond or turn around. As she faded into the alley, I wasn't even sure she had heard me at all. Back in the tunnel, I told Fritz and Dominic about my encounter with Anna. Dominic had plenty to say about her decision to talk to the Stasi tomorrow, but he didn't understand the intimidation of the secret police, not like Fritz, who merely nodded and said we would find a way out in time. After Fritz mortared the brick we had already brought down, there wasn't much more we could do from our end. It would be several hours before the mortar was dry enough to lift overhead. I offered to dig just a little, but Dominic said Papa had insisted we not weaken the wall. Neither of us wanted to go home either. Mama must have been pacing the floor to wonder how things were going here, but I hoped she'd know bad news would carry to her. Neither of us wanted to go home either. Mama must have been pacing the floor to wonder how things were going here, but I hoped she'd know bad news would carry to her. If there was no news, it meant things were still okay. Dominic spent some of our wait telling us about his life in the West. Things between our two countries are much more tense than you probably hear about, he said. They call it a Cold War between East and West. Nobody is firing shots, but each side wants to make the other believe they're ready for World War III if necessary. We've got some news reports, Fritz said. We know about the Cold War. Dominic chuckled. Yeah, but until you see it from this side of the wall, you can't appreciate how much of the battle is about show. Berlin is like this microscope for the rest of the world because anyone can look at the two halves of the city and so easily compare our lives. Papa says both sides are like two insecure men on a beach flexing their muscles to prove who's strongest. I smiled and asked, who is strongest then? Dominic paused. It's hard to say at this point. School is harder in the East, and the communist newspapers always show lots of happy crowds. If you only read their papers, your lives look really good. But I stand on the platforms to see in the East and then turn back to the West and think, where do I want to live? There's nothing that would take me back there again. We have more things here, and fancier buildings, and music that will knock your socks off. But the difference isn't about any of that. It's just the wall. I whispered, if our lives are so good, we wouldn't need the wall. Yeah. Fritz tapped my shoulder. Go get Mama. We're leaving tonight. I sat up. Really? We'll be able to open up this tunnel? We have to open it. Even if we have to run for our lives as the tunnel collapses behind us, we're going to open it tonight. Fritz turned to where Dominic would be. Go tell Father what we're doing. It must be tonight. We heard Dominic scramble off, and then I said, Mama can't leave yet. If she's spotted by someone who knows she called in sick, then stay with her until this evening. She should be all right to leave then, but be careful. There'll be police hunting for me, and if I'm seen on the streets, I'll be arrested. So you and Mama will have to get yourselves here. Can you do that? I swallowed hard. Yes. Fritz handed me the shovel. Go stick this in the dirt outside. If Mueller is watching, we need to give him the signal to come. I pushed it back to him. We don't owe Mueller anything. Besides, we still need the shovel in here. He gave the shovel to me again. We made him a promise, Goethe. And as far as we can tell, he's kept his end of our bargain. Besides, I have the hand shovel. I nodded and took it out with me. I stuck it square in the center of our garden patch, where, for the first time, I noticed sprouts from young squash plants. Maybe they would grow and provide food for some families here. I hoped so. Even at those times when you want to say goodbye, it's still sad when the moment comes. I thought about that as I walked home, how odd it was to realize I might never see this side of the wall again. Wherever I looked before, I had only seen the bland communist gray, but this time I noticed spurts of color on our trees and in decorations that occasionally hung from windows. The approved communist art on the sides of buildings inevitably depicted strength and power. I didn't care much for it, but I realized that it had encouraged me to be a stronger person, a lesson that ironically had carried me through the hardest moments of digging out the tunnel. I was proud of the person I had become over the last month, and all that I had withstood. And no matter where I went in the future, a part of me would always belong to the East. Mama clutched at me when I came home, but said nothing. I had already planned out the words I would say to her, something to make our situation clear without betraying us. Are you feeling better? I asked, because Fritz is definitely joining the military tonight and he wants us there to see him off. She smiled with tears in her eyes and then hugged me tight. Just a few more hours to wait, and we would be gone. Chapter 43. I stared at the clock on our stove. willing the hands to move faster, and then feeling frustrated because they didn't. Everything had been cleaned and packed up, so now there was nothing left but to wait and to think and then to think about waiting. It was unbearable, and I didn't understand how Mama could sit so calmly on the couch and knit a blanket she knew full well would never be finished. I did have one particular thought that continued to nag at me. As silly as it might have been to care about something so trivial, I wish I had offered Anna the harvest from our garden. I looked back on all she had done for me since we started on the tunnel. What I had thought was her cruel rejection of our friendship was only her way of creating distance between us so that she wouldn't have to know anything I might be up to. Then, when the Stasi began putting more pressure on her, she had warmed to me again. By my cold responses, she must have known I was keeping secrets. But when she discovered them, she would have been entirely justified in revealing everything she knew. She held back to protect me, risking herself and everyone she loved. And in return, I couldn't even offer her family our harvest. But there was something I could do. I sat at the small desk in my room that afternoon and began to write a letter. Her name was at the top, but the letter was not for her. It was for the Stasi who would search my apartment tomorrow. Dear Anna, I'm writing this letter to apologize for my rude behavior of the last couple of months. You were broken-hearted when your brother tried to escape and never guessed he would try such a thing. But I wasn't there for you like I should have been. I wasn't the friend you deserved. What I couldn't tell you was that I came to understand why Peter left. You don't know, so I'm telling you now. He was right. We are not animals who can be corralled behind a cement wall. And although the state might listen to our words and watch our actions, they will never know my thoughts, which means they will never truly control me. And if I am my own person, then it's time for me to leave this prison. Somewhere in his growing up, Peter saw the sun in the west and couldn't live through another dark night. Nor will I. If you had known my plans, I know you would have tried to stop me, so please for keeping you in the dark. Your truest friend, Goethe. I read the letter over and over again, erasing parts that didn't seem quite right and replacing them with words that better communicated my feelings. Everything I wrote in there was true, except for the last couple of lines. Those were meant to protect Anna from any accusations of helping us escape. Then I left the letter on my desk, where it would be found easily tomorrow. Once I left my room, Mama had returned to cleaning. I suppose that kept her mind busy, but at the moment she was polishing the brass knobs on an old rocker in the corner of the room. She was as anxious as I was. In the center of the room was a pile of the things that she wanted to bring with us to the West. It was far more than she and I could carry together, and I knelt beside it to weed out what could be left behind. Mama let me do it without protesting. Maybe she figured that would keep me busy too. I didn't want any of my clothes, not one piece. They were bland and orderly and represented a life I intended to leave behind. Besides, I'd seen the magazines and knew how girls my age were dressing elsewhere. Fritz wouldn't want his clothes either, and I promised myself that I would make Mama change her fashions too. It was for her own good. In the center of the pile was a box of china that had been passed down to my mother when she was married. It had been in her family for generations, which meant it had come through 2 world wars, the Allied bombings, the hunger winter of 1947, and somehow had even survived the tennis balls my brother swore they never tossed around our apartment. Mama loved those dishes, and so did I. They were supposed to come to me one day. But how would we ever carry them so far? I shook my head at her and pushed the box aside. Mama must have known I was right because her only protest was a weak sigh and a passing frown. She knelt down and wrote on a paper, "For Frau Eberhardt, I forgive you." I set her note on top of the box more gently than Frau Eberhardt deserved. If my mother was trying to teach me a lesson, then the point of it escaped me. I hoped to understand forgiveness better one day. Moving my attention back to the pile, I found my old stuffed bear near the bottom. One eye was missing and the stitching had come loose along its back, but I never cared that he wasn't perfect. For weeks after the barbed wire fence went up, and Papa and Dominic didn't come home, I wrapped this bear in my arms every night and cried into its fur. It had comforted me then, but within a few hours I would have my It had comforted me then, but within a few hours I would have my father back again. I didn't need the bear anymore. Mama also had her Bible in the stack. I shook my head and started to move it aside, but Mama pulled it back, insisting it must come with us. I took another paper and on it wrote, "For the Stasi, who need it more than we do." Then I set it on the Bible and handed it over to her. She read the note, silently mouthed words I couldn't read, and then set the Bible aside. As part of her insistence that we leave everything cleaner than the day it was new, Mama suggested that we put away the items that couldn't come with us. Afterward, we shared a small supper together. I wished there was more, but told myself I could have as big a supper as I wanted tomorrow. We didn't say much to each other. Our hearts and minds had already flown to the tunnel, so nothing was left to talk about here. Once we were cleaned up, Mama announced it was time to go and meet Fritz, to take him to the military station. I literally dropped everything and dove into a sweater to leave. After so many long days of back-aching work, our time had finally come. But even as we reached for the knob to leave, a knock came at our door. Mama quickly motioned for me to remove my sweater and clear everything from the front room that might look suspicious. Maybe it was only a neighbor coming to borrow an egg, or something equally innocent, but even the simplest visitor could present a major problem. We only had a few sacks, mostly old photos and family records and a personal treasure for each person in the family, but I grabbed them and stuffed everything into an empty cupboard in the kitchen. Then she answered the door. "Frau Lowe, guten Abend," a man's voice said. "May we come in?" The door was just wide enough for me to see who was on the other side. When I did, my breath caught in my throat. This was no visiting neighbor. The Grenzers had come for us at last.